President, please be seated. The chamber now is back in session, and the floor is given to the co-prosecutor to resume questioning to the witness. You may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Earlier, I read out to you an excerpt from your own statement. It ended as follows, in English.
Arrested and interrogated them. We released the refugees if they did not answer our questions and tried to hide their identity. We would send them to our security office.
Now, regarding the different vessels patrolling around the islands, were there any Vietnamese interpreters that could interrogate people who had been arrested?
At each vessel stationed at various islands, there were no interpreters. Some of the vessels did not go out to carry out their mission. Out of the 10 vessels, we stationed at 2 main locations. One was at Ochetil and another one at Koh Rung San Lam.
If there were no interpreters on the boats, then wasn't it obvious that the Vietnamese who had been arrested would not be able to answer the questions that were put to them? And you said that in this case, they would be sent to the security office.
Based on my statement with the document center of Cambodia that I have already answered earlier, that the information I received that there were no interpreters on the vessels because it was not the task of each vessels, it was the task in charge by the division level. So people on the vessels were not aware of those matters.
Fine. You said just before the break, that you personally had not stopped any Vietnamese vessels during the 2 years that you were a captain on a vessel. However, in the excerpt that I read out, each time you used the personal pronoun I or we. You said that when I went to check, they were Vietnamese ships, for example. We arrested them. We arrested the crew and interrogated them. So why did you use I and we if it wasn't you who was involved?
Regarding the word I and we that I gave to the documentation centers in my interview with Long Dani, I used the word I, and when I use the word we, I refer to the soldiers stationed at various locations. So when I refer to I, in my interview with Long Dani, I refer to myself. But when I use the word we, I refer to various soldiers based at different locations.
Yesterday, I believe I understood that you said that refugees who had been arrested at sea or who had been intercepted at sea had been released. And now you're telling us that there were no interpreters on board, and therefore it was necessary to send them ashore to interrogate them. So how did you learn then that refugees had apparently been released? If it wasn't you who was involved, were colleagues involved of yours and the refugees were released? So how did you learn about this?
In my statement that I gave during my interview, I spoke based on the information that I received from the regiments and from the radio broadcast. What I told was not about my personal responsibility, because I have my responsibility was to train how to use the new ships that were delivered from the upper echelon to us.
Now, regarding these communication issues with the Vietnamese who were arrested by or intercepted by your colleagues, were there Vietnamese people who were arrested who pretended to be deaf and dumb? And in that case, what would happen to them? Is this comparable to the situation you already described, or did something else happen?
I do not understand your question. Are you referring to the Vietnamese, or are you asking me as a witness?
Non, mais c'est le témoin.
No, witness. Among the Vietnamese people who were arrested on the vessel by your colleagues, and you also talked about what you heard on the radio. So my question was, were there any Vietnamese who pretended to be deaf and dumb, and therefore who would pretend not to understand anything, and who also pretended not to be able to speak?
As I told you earlier, regarding that matter, it is not under my responsibility, so I was not aware of it. Because, as I told you, I had a different responsibility. My main responsibility was to maintain and use the vessels to ensure that the vessel is ready for combat when there was an encroachment from the enemy.
D'accord, mais
Fine, but you said that your main task was to patrol around the islands. That's what you told us yesterday, and I'm basing myself only on what you said previously, and I'd like to read out what you said to DCCAM on page 53 and 54 in English, E3/9113 and Khmer 00926385. and you answered a question that was put to you by Danny in English.
Didn't know them. Some of them did not say anything and pretended to be deaf and mad. We did not believe them because mad people could not ride the boats. It was impossible to have 2 or 3 mad people on the boats. Finally, we sent them to the security officers to be in charge. We sent them to the division who would send them further. Question, were all of them Vietnamese? Answer, yes, they were youth. Question, were there many of them? Answer, there were many of them. Question by Long Dani, did you arrest them every month? Your answer, well, during the 2-year period, we caught them almost every month. They came to Koh Tang and Koh Wai Island. End of quote. Et je me corrige.
Well, in fact, I'm going to correct myself. It wasn't deaf and dumb. It was deaf and mad, in fact. So can you confirm what you said to DC Cam in this interview? Is that what you indeed said to Long Dani?
It was my statement to Long Dani. But I would like to clarify that it was an information that I received from the division level, that the information on the activities of the enemies and on their tricks. So it was simply the information conveyed from the division to me. It was not what I did.
So is it true, according to your statements, that you were essentially stationed around Koh Tmei and Koh Se at night, and that you would return to Ochitil during the day?
In fact, I did not go out to base at Koh Se or Koh Tmei. But my task was to go out and to cross-check the numbers of vessels and the exact activities there. So in order to identify which ship did what, we gave the number to each ship to identify in order to be easy for us to report about their assignments and their activities.
Monsieur le témoin, j'ai
Witness, I don't have much time left, so I asked you if you would work essentially at night. That is, say you would patrol at night around the islands, or would you work during the day? And my second question is, as far as you know, were there more arrests of Vietnamese vessels at night or during the day?
Once a week, I went out on my mission at night time. And during my mission, I never encountered the Vietnamese boat in Cambodia's water, because I think they were also aware that our boat was a military patrol boat, so if they entered the water, then they could face the the sinking or the arrest from us. So I think the Vietnamese people was well aware of what would happen if they encountered with the military ship like ours. So people who travel frequently on in the sea, they were well aware of this matter.
Fine. You brought up in your statements that having seen twice the arrest of Vietnamese refugees in 1977 in Koh Pulawai, in particular at answer 121 of your WRI before the OCIJ. Yesterday, you only spoke about one of these episodes. You spoke about a Vietnamese person and an Indian person whom you saw being arrested on the islands. So can you tell us what you saw during the second incident, which involved men, women, and children, based on what you said in answer 123 of your WRI? What did you see? How many were there? Where did they come from? And were they detained?
Me clarified. What I gave in the statement came from the information, and that information came from the island sent to the division, and the division sent the instruction to vessels to be vigilant. So that information contained some information like the arrest of people at Pulawai Islands and other islands. But it was not, as I told you, it was not my responsibility.
But yesterday you told us that you went to Pulawai during your training. And I'm going to quote what you said, because here the use of the pronoun I seems quite clear to me. Answer 121. So you speak about the capture of the Vietnamese vessels. So the question, did Division 164 often carry out such arrests? Answer, no, it wouldn't do so that often. I remember having seen this kind of arrest twice from my own eyes. And when I was on Pulawai Island once. Question 123, can you speak to us about the size of these vessels and about the number of people who are on board? Answer 123, I saw that these were Vietnamese refugees. There were men, women, and also children on board. When did you see all of this? I saw this in 1977, but I don't remember the day nor the month, the exact day or the exact month. So can you tell us the approximate number of people who were arrested on these vessels? Answer 125. The first time they arrested between 5 to 6 Vietnamese, and there might have been more than that, but I have forgotten. End of quote. Free translation. So here you're telling us that you saw this with your own eyes. You're using the pronoun I everywhere in this statement. So can you explain to us if you saw this with your own eyes or not?
When I went to Pulawai Chah and Pulawai Thmai, I did not witness the arrest, but I witnessed the Vietnamese who were sitting there. And when I arrived there, I saw them Yeah, and there were 5 or 6 of them, and and that was what I saw. But I would like to clarify that it was not under my responsibility. And during the interview, I was in a situation in which when Danny asked me any question and then I had to answer. And I had to answer based on what I knew.
Monsieur le témoin.
Witness, I'm not saying that that was your responsibility. That's not at all what I was saying. I was simply asking you to tell us what you saw or what you heard. You said that they were sitting there. Were they tied up? Were they detained?
In fact, I saw the Vietnamese eating, they were eating rice and their hands were not tied up because they could use their hand to eat rice. So at that time, I packed my vessels there so that I could go to the toilets, and after that I left that area.
Bien, j'en viens.
Well, now let me turn to your estimate of the number of Vietnamese who had been arrested by sailors in the islands. That's question of 132 in your WRI before the OCIJ. And you answered, as far as I remember, they arrested more than 100 Vietnamese, free translation. And I think you're speaking here about the totality of the period. Do you remember having said that? And when you say more than 100, does that cover the entire period during which you were a captain aboard a vessel? I'm not saying that you yourself arrested Vietnamese people. I'm saying, did you hear about that?
In fact, based on the information I received, and that information I gave in my statements during the interview with Long Dani. So I told Dani that I heard that information and she recorded my voice and she kept that document and he kept that document until 2017 that I saw it, said the witness. So the statement that I gave to Long Dani that you quoted was really what I did say, but I just want to emphasize that it was just an information I heard.
Nous avons bien.
We have understood, of course, that part of your testimony, and we know that it was only information. This, in fact, so therefore, was a testimony before the OCIJ. Now, regarding this estimate, your estimate of more than 100 Vietnamese people who were arrested, I'd like to know if most of these Vietnamese people had been arrested by ships from the DK Navy, or if they had been arrested by infantry units that were stationed on the various islands.
សូមជម្រាប
The arrest was carried out by soldiers based at islands. And those islands soldiers, they had their own vessels for patrol, so the arrest was not by the naval force.
Bien.
Fine. There is a witness to TCW 823 who was leading the troops on Kohtmei Island, and he said in his WRI E319/23.3.21 at answer 124, he said the following in English.
Both units were in charge of capturing Vietnamese fishermen and seizing their boats. My unit, stationed on the island, did not have the capacity to seize those boats. When we encountered them, we would retreat. When we fired, we intended to sink the boats straight away. We did not capture people at sea. End of quote.
So, you are saying that the arrests were carried out by the people on the islands, and he,
President, Council Kong Som On, you have the floor. Kong Som On, I do not object this question, but I would like to make an observation related to what the deputy co-prosecutor raised in the wording he used to the witness, that he used the words eyewitness or I saw, that the witness used in his statement to the DC camp. I noticed that there was a different translation in the use of the terms in Khmer and in English version.
In the Khmer verse, the word is je or we, but in the English translation is I. So this is different from what was quoted in the questions by the deputy co-prosecutor. And for example, in document E3/9113, and in Khmer is at 00926384, and in English 00974206. That is the word or the phrase after cassette number 2, Sarat said, and I quote, and after that is the question by Dane. When we saw the boat, we saw the Vietnamese in there, is it? And Sarat replies, we arrested them. So this is just an example to highlight the word used in the Khmer text. However, in the English, the translation is I, not we. So it becomes personal in the English translation, and this is my observation, Mr. President.
Monsieur le Président, le temps.
Mr. President, I'm running out of time. I am in the middle of a question, right in the middle of a question, and we have a remark. I'm not saying that that remark is not irrelevant, but to interrupt my examination of the witness, that has nothing to do with that remark. And I believe the Kyo Sampan defense team will have ample time to revisit that issue during the cross-examination. If the chamber would allow me, let me rephrase a question for the witness. Witness, you said that people and troops posted on the islands carried out arrests. We have listened to witness to TCW 823, who says that it was indeed the Marines, the unit of boats that was in charge of capturing Vietnamese fishermen and seizing their boats. We have two contradictory versions. Now tell me, was it the Marine that was in charge of capturing boats, or soldiers on the islands, or were both the Marines and the soldiers on the islands who captured the boats, or one of the two? What is your answer to this question?
Allow me to clarify the issue. There were two categories of vessels. There is one group that is the patrol boats stationed at various islands, and their duty was to capture any boat encroaching the territorial seas. And in fact, there were two boats used for that purpose. They were American boats. And of course, it is the PCS boats. These two boats were tasked to patrol and seize any encroaching boat. And for us, our vessel was larger, so it could not be used for that specific purpose. Our vessel consumes 2 tons of fuel per hour. For that reason, it was not applicable for such a purpose. And such purpose was tasked for those two PCS boats. And I do not know whether those people involved with those two boats are alive.
Je vais revenir alors aux chiffres que vous avez donnés.
I will look at the figure you gave, that more than 100 Vietnamese were arrested during the time you spent in Regiment 140. That is what you told the OCIJ investigators. But, perhaps this figure and what Miasmot himself says may be of some assistance. That's what he said to the hierarchy. It's document E3/987. 997, beg your pardon. It's a secret communication on the 20th of March 1977, addressed by Miasmot to the very respected 189. In number 3 of the document, this is what Mert states. At Koh Tang Island on March 20, 1978, at 2:30 hours, our 800cc motor-driven boat managed to catch 2 Vietnamese motor-driven boats with 76 Vietnamese people. Both young and old, male and female. When we tied them up, the smaller motor-driven boat was shaky and plunged. As a result, 2 people fell into the water and we were unable to find them. The rest have been brought to the mainland. End of quote. Some of it was free translation. My question is, you said your boat was quite big. What was the horsepower of your boat?
I cannot recall the horsepower of my vessel. However, there were 5 machines and there was 1 generator. Amongst those machines, there were rather 4 large engines, and the fuel reserved was 20 tons for that vessel, but I cannot recall the horsepower capacity of that vessel. What I can recall is that there were 4 large engines. Deputy Co-Prosecutor, it seems that you ran out of time.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, Mr. President. I was going to give the civil parties 10 to 15 minutes. So, as you said, I will take 10 to 15 minutes to complete my examination.
No, your allotted time has concluded. And Councillor Copper, you have the floor.
That was exactly my observation, Mr. President. It's concluded 7 minutes ago.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, we heard your instructions saying that we had to end at 10:30. You said it at 10:30, so we still have some time. I am in the middle of my examination. I still have some questions to ask.
We actually informed you already spent 2.5 sessions already, and that you only had a half session left. For that reason, you should actually arrange your questions to fit the allotted time, and for that reason, you are no longer given the floor. And also, the elite co-lawyer, please be seated. And I'd like to inquire with the judges of the bench if you have questions to put to the witness. And it seems that Judge Lavergne had some questions. You may proceed, Judge.
Oui, bonjour, monsieur.
Yes, good morning, witness. I have a few questions for you. First of all, regarding what you said yesterday as concerns relations between democratic Cambodia and Vietnam. For a start, I'd like us to talk about the conflicts that may have occurred in democratic Cambodia's territorial waters. Yesterday, you said that in early 1975, there was a hot battlefield between Vietnamese troops and Democratic Cambodia troops. Can you tell us exactly what you were referring to when you said there was a hot battlefield and what happened?
When I use the word hot in this context is that in early 1975, although I cannot recall it exactly, that it could happen in April, there was a fighting between the forces of Vietnam and of Democratic Cambodia at the islands. Vietnamese forces arrested 720 DK soldiers and detained them in Cotrol. The negotiation took place in 1977 between DK and the Vietnamese authority, and as a result, those detainees or prisoners of war were returned to Cambodia.
Peut-être que je n'ai pas très bien compris, mais...
Perhaps I didn't quite understand your testimony. Where had those soldiers from Democratic Cambodia been arrested? Were they arrested while they were on Cambodian islands or on Vietnamese islands? In any case, the islands that were in dispute.
The arrest actually took place on the islands of Pulawai Chah and Pulawai Thmai, which belongs to Cambodia. That is, it was part of the Cambodian territorial waters.
Et à votre connaissance,
And to your knowledge, did the Cambodian troops go to station themselves on the islands in dispute that had previously been occupied by Vietnam?
To my knowledge, in 1975, the forces of Democratic Cambodia reached Koh Trol. However, the Vietnamese troops did not allow them to enter. For that reason, the DK forces returned from Koh Trol.
alors peut-être que pour moi c'est pas très.
Well, perhaps for me it is not very clear. Do you know the islands Phu Quoc and To Chu that have Vietnamese names? And to your knowledge, did the Democratic Kampuchea forces take positions on those islands?
Your Honor, please repeat the names of those islands. To me, it's not that clear.
L'île de
Phu Quoc Island and To Chu Island, or To Chau.
To my knowledge, I do not know the names of these islands in Vietnamese language. What I know is Koh Trol, Koh Tun Sai, Koh Pulawai Chah, Koh Pulawai Thmai, and Koh Krachok Seh. I do not know the names in Vietnamese language for these islands.
et sur ces îles qui sont
And as those islands, which according to you belong to Cambodians, were there any Vietnamese civilians on them?
In 1975, those islands whose names that I mentioned, there were no Vietnamese civilians living there. There were no inhabitants on Pulawai Chah and Pulawai Thmai islands. However, there were marks that ships or vessels anchored on these islands. The troops got off the vessel and positioned themselves on the islands, and the information that I received from them was that there were no Vietnamese inhabitants on these islands.
donc si je
So if I understand you correctly, Mr. Witness, what you are saying is that it was the Vietnamese armed forces that came and attacked the forces of Democratic Kampuchea and arrested and detained the DK forces.
est-ce que vous savez pour quelle raison
Do you know why the Vietnamese armed forces did that?
What I know is that there was an attack at the time, and the Vietnamese troops deployed several vessels to surrender the islands, to cut off the transportation vessels. For that reason, the DK troops were isolated and cut off from logistics and food supply. Vietnamese deployed ships and troops to surrender the island and seized or arrest those Khmer Rouge troops.
Donc, l'attaque.
Since you used the word attack, so that attack was initially launched by Khmer troops or by Vietnamese troops?
The Cambodian troops were on their sovereign island, and actually the attack was instigated by the other party through their troops and vessels. Of course, we did not initiate an attack on their sovereign territorial waters.
Et vous avez participé à...
And did you take part in the confrontations? Were you present, or that is something you merely heard someone mention?
No, I was not present there. I only heard of this information through soldiers who were arrested at Control, and when they returned, they spoke about that event.
Est-ce que vous étiez présent lorsque...
Were you present when the boat, the Mayagaise, was captured?
No, I was not present when the Mayagaise ship was seized. At that time, I did not have any vessel under my supervision, and actually I was stationed on shore with the division. At that time, the division actually had not yet organized a navy force.
Je voudrais également revenir...
I would also like to revisit what you said yesterday regarding the deportation of Vietnamese to Vietnam. Yesterday, you stated as follows: I do not recall when the Vietnamese were deported, but I know that there was indeed a deportation, and you referred to a deportation that was carried out in 1973, and you said that at the time there had been fighting. You also made mention of a deportation in 1975 and another in 1976. Now, I would like us to start by talking about the deportation you said occurred in 1973. What can you tell us regarding that deportation? Who had decided that such a deportation would be carried out, and do you know how many persons were deported to Vietnam?
In 1973, there was a clash between the Viet Cong force and the DK force in the area of Campot. And the clash was actually intensified, and the clash was between the military forces against the Viet Cong military forces and not the Vietnamese civilians. Those Viet Cong forces actually took refuge in the territory of Cambodia, and then they clashed with the DK forces. The Vietnamese troops were stationed there per decision by Tam Mok. At that time, I was an ordinary combatant, and what I knew was my experience in hand-to-hand combat against the Vietnamese at Lung Vang, at Chuk, at Phnom Tung in Chuk Mi district. And here I refer to the combat between the DK military forces against the Vietnamese forces in 1973. Later on, he said that we should not engage in combat with these people and allow them to be stationed at the border, that is at Runim Mountain in Tu Mi district. But I cannot recall the actual number of those Vietnamese troops.
Quand vous dites il,
When you say they, and that, or rather, when you say he, who said there wasn't going to be deportation, what are you referring to? To Tam Mok, or to who exactly?
When I use the word they, I do not mean Tam Mok. I refer to the Vietnamese troops.
vous faisiez partie des...
You were a member of the forces of the Southwest at the time. Who commanded the Southwest forces? Was it Miasmut or Tam Mok?
The commander in charge in the Southwest zone was Tam Mok, since he was the chief of the zone.
Alors, qu'est-ce que vous êtes?
Now, what did Tam Mok tell you as regards the situation? Did Tam Mok agree that the Viet Cong forces remain on Cambodian territory, or he disagreed with that?
From what I knew at the time, it was not clear to me regarding the relationship between the Vietnamese troops and Tam Mok, or whether there was any discussion that took place between the Vietnamese troops and Tam Mok. However, my unit engaged in combat with the Vietnamese troops, and what I can recall is that Tam Mok made with a military commander on the Vietnamese side, and his name is Bai Seung, for the negotiation. Later on, there was another representative, Ba Bao, who led the negotiation with the Tam Mok for the Vietnamese troops to be allowed to stay at the Tà Nghiêng mountain.
Bien.
Very well. You talked of a deportation. Was there a deportation of civilians in 1973? Or were some Viet Cong regiments have to leave Cambodian territory?
What I say is not meant the deportation of the civilians. I refer to the Viet Cong troops who took refuge in Cambodia in various locations, and that they acted inappropriately toward the Cambodian people. And also, this is compounded by the fact that we clashed with them. We were part of the military unit in Cambodia, and we clashed with the Vietnamese troops in the area. And actually, the clash lasted for more than a fortnight. Then I saw the arrival of Tam Mok at the battlefield. He told us that we stopped fighting them since they agreed to take their troops under the supervision of Bai Seung or Ba Bao to settle at Phnom Lengnieng. And actually, Phnom Lengnieng or Lengnieng Mountain was located in Truc My district, which is adjacent to the Cambodian-Vietnam border.
Savez-vous si à un moment donné,
Do you know whether at any point in time Viet Cong troops totally disappeared from Cambodian territory, and if yes, on what date?
When you talk about the area, it was large in scale geographically, and I can only speak about my area that my unit was involved in. I cannot recall the exact date that they disappeared from Cambodian territory. At the time, I was not in a position to have a greater knowledge regarding the day of their disappearance. What I knew is that there were clashes, and that later on the Viet Cong troops were sent to that designated area that I mentioned earlier.
vous avez ensuite parlé donc de deux.
You subsequently talked of two other deportations, one in 1975 and another in 1976. What can you tell us as regards those deportations? Did they concern civilians? And were the orders issued by the upper echelons? How exactly did it happen?
To my knowledge, and here I refer only to the information relayed from the upper level, that is through the division, through the regimental level, and through my level. I do not know actually how many civilians or how many soldiers there were.
Well, how is it that you were able to tell us that there were deportations in 75 and in 76? What do you know about these deportations? Did you witness them, or did you receive orders regarding them?
Allow me to clarify it again. That was the information that I received, and I personally did not involved in this matter. I only received information that the upper echelon had to return those Vietnamese to Vietnam. But there was no clear indication as to the exact number or the date that they had to be returned.
Did you hear about a program that consisted in exchanging people of Vietnamese origin against Cambodians from Kampuchea Kraum.
No, I did not know about that.
If I understood you well, after April 1975, you arrived in the Kompong Som area. You were stationed at Ochetil and then on the islands. As far as you know, were there people of Vietnamese origin where you were stationed? And if that was the case, were these people deported?
To my knowledge and from what I can recall, after I left Phnom Penh and arrived in Kampong Saum, initially I was stationed near Kong Keng airfield. And after the Navy force was organized, I was assigned to be stationed on the island of Kung Kahrung Sanlam. And my personal encounter at the time is that I only saw Cambodian people and not Vietnamese people. Here I refer to the time that I was stationed near Kong Keng airfield, and while I was on Kahrung Sanlam, I did not see any civilian inhabitants. Even the Cambodian fishermen did not remain at the island. They all returned to Kampong Saum.
And did you hear anything about the treatment that might have been meted out to the Vietnamese civilians who might have been living in those areas?
Personally, I did not receive such information. I did not have anything to do with that. I did not know if there were Vietnamese living at any specific location. I was not involved in this, nor did I receive information regarding this matter.
Well, fine, Mr. President. I'll have further questions to put to the witness, but I think it's now time to take the break.
President, thank you. It is now appropriate for our lunch break. We'll take a break now and resume at 1:30 this afternoon. Court officer, please assist the witness at the waiting room reserved for witnesses during the lunch break and invite him as well as his duty counsel back into the courtroom at 1:30 this afternoon. Security personnel, you are instructed to take Kyo Sampon to the waiting room downstairs and have him returned to attend the proceedings this afternoon before 1:30. The court is now in recess.
សូមអញ្ជើញក្រោកឈរ